So, talking about the Olympic lifts today. Before I get into it, I tend to just press record and go on these. So, I'm going to try and do a little bit of a spiel before I actually start getting into the results. These ones are pretty straightforward, so it shouldn't be too long a time frame. But I think I mentioned this in previous videos. If anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about these approaches, leave me a comment or send me an email. I'm going to leave my email in the description of the video so that you can get in contact if you want to learn more about the methodology, find out some more details, or you want to see some slightly different results. Feel free to contact me. I've also mentioned if you're an athlete, if you're a coach and you want to use this approach to assess your individual weaknesses on either open workouts, max lifts, benchmarks, I think it's pretty viable. It could be pretty interesting. But because I'm still working out if it is a fully viable approach, I'm happy to do it for no charge to start out with. So there's almost no cost apart from a little bit of time and discussion, but there could be a huge benefit. So feel free to, again, send me an email, send me a message, leave me a comment, get in touch, and we can put something together. Now, we're talking about the Olympic lifts today. So we kind of want to have some view of, hey, if I want to get this strong at the clean and jerk and the snatch, how much do I actually need to be back squatting, deadlifting, and are there other factors that kind of influence that? So what we're looking at now is the clean and jerk on the y-axis, and how that relates to the back squat, the deadlift, a 400-meter sprint, and the max pull-ups. So it should be no surprise that, hey, the more you back squat, the more you're going to clean and jerk. And we can kind of get into specifics on that, but that has a pretty profound relationship. Now, keep in mind that as we looked at a few open workouts and as we look through more and maybe some benchmarks, your proficiency in the Olympic lifts is a really critical determining factor, because that is almost most of the workout contains your ability to move Olympic lifts repetitively for time. So your proficiency in the Olympic lifts is really important. Working a step back, if your Olympic lifts are important, then your back squat is going to be really important as well. And I think anyone who has done enough CrossFit and has looked at programming can kind of know, hey, I need to be squatting maybe twice, maybe 3 times a week and getting that number up. I think what's helpful here is we can actually put some numbers around that. So if we have specific goals, then we can kind of reverse engineer what our back squat will need to be to get to that. And we'll look at that one in a second. So obviously the deadlift is going to be somewhat important. You need to pick the bar up from the floor in order to be able to clean and jerk it. But this graph, which is the second one along, kind of indicates to me that as long as you have sufficient deadlift strength, that working on it more is not going to lead to more marginal or more significant improvements in your clean and jerking. So it does seem to be the case that, hey, if you're in that 100 to 150, you do need to work on that deadlift. If you're in the 150 to 200 kilogram range, probably some benefit. If you're above 200, you may be looking at less than a 10 kilo increase on average if you were to increase your deadlift. So it is useful, but probably once you reach a certain point, you're going to be better off spending more time on squatting patterns than you are on deadlifting. Again, I don't think this is a huge surprise. I had a look at the 400-meter sprint time. There is a really slight relationship here. I would suggest that people who are good at sprinting are really good at that explosive hip opening and getting to a triple extension position, which you also need to do the Olympic lifts well. So if that's something that you're less than proficient with, there might be an underlying movement pattern there that you could kind of address. Probably not necessarily the case that if you're trying to add 5-10 kilos to your clean and jerk that you need to go and do a lot of 400-meter repeats. But if 400-meter running is something you struggle with, then hey, maybe there's something in there that you need to kind of look at, an underlying issue. And then the last one is max pull-ups. So this, even though it's kind of the opposite movement pattern, because the clean and jerk is a pull from the floor and then the press or the receiving of the position overhead, the pull-up is the pull from the hang position to the support, not to support to the pull-up position. But it probably would be the case that if you're good at pull-ups, you have a good core ability, basically a good midline, and that you have pretty good posterior pulling ability, ability to use your scapulars. So it generally represents a good, well-rounded athlete. We've seen with the open workouts that if you're in that 50 to 75 pull-up range for your max unbroken set, then you're in a pretty good position, athletically speaking. And this is kind of no different. Like, hey, if you're in that range, you're going to be clean and jerking at a pretty good level, all other things being equal, which is important to keep in mind. Again, like the deadlift, there's a little bit of gains to be made here if you can bump that number up, but not going to be the hugest one. So that's the clean and jerk. We might look at the snatch next. Really briefly, I think the differences between the snatch and the clean and jerk is that the deadlift has more of a linear effect, doesn't seem to saturate as much. I'm not sure why that would be the case, but maybe this is all in all a smaller effect anyway. So while your deadlift, improving your deadlift might have a bit of an improvement on your snatch, the percentage improvement for each percentage improvement in your deadlift is not going to be the same as the clean and jerk. We see pretty similar effects for the 400 meter sprint and the max pull-ups. So if you're getting better at those, that's a good thing, but it's not going to be the main source of improvement. It's really about the back squat here. And I think the only thing that's different between the clean and jerk and the snatch, it's just that the variance is a bit wider as you get to those high back squat numbers. And that probably reflects the fact that the snatch is a more technical lift. So it's going to expose flaws, if you have flaws in terms of your ability to receive the bar in the overhead position, and get deep into a squat at the same time, or any flaws in terms of how you get to extension, and if the bar's getting out of position there. So we can kind of see this in a slightly different plot, which is what I'm experimenting with. So what we have here on the x-axis is the clean and jerk weight, and on the y-axis is the back squat weight. And what we can do is we can reverse engineer this. So we can say if I'm back squatting, for example, 150 kilos, actually it's better to go the other way. Let's say I want to clean and jerk 125 kilos. I can go along to that point on the x-axis, look up to the y-axis and say, well, if I'm then back squatting 140 kilos, there's a really slight outside chance that I'll be able to hit that, but it's less than an 80% chance. So, sorry, less than a 20% chance, because that wider interval is an 80% interval. However, if I go up to the 150, so if I'm able to get my back squat to the 150, I have a bit more of a chance of hitting it if I'm really technically dialed in, or I just seem to be quite good at getting under the bar quickly. Or maybe I'm just not that good at back squatting relative to my front squat. So some people are just really good squatters. And so their back squat might be a really pretty to watch back squat that actually has them in a really good position, and they can front squat a lot of that weight, whereas other people probably tend to hinge out of that back squat and it doesn't translate as well to front squatting and your squat clean. So outside chance if you're back squatting 150, and then if you want to hit 125 kilos, that's about 275 pounds, and you're back squatting 160, you're kind of within this thicker 50% interval. So we're saying, yeah, there's maybe a 50% chance that you can hit that weight if you're back squatting 160. Moving up, okay, now if you're at 170, you're a pretty good chance we'd expect you're able to hit that weight. And if you're at 180, we'd say it's more likely that you're able to hit that weight. So one way we can look at this is to say, hey, if you want to hit 125 for a clean and jerk, you can kind of reverse engineer what that back squat needs to be able to hit that weight. So probably if you're, say, at 150 for your max back squat and you want to hit 125 for your clean and jerk, then bumping that up by 10 kilos will give yourself a pretty decent chance of hitting that weight, and then another 10 kilos to 170 will almost put the odds into your favor. Another way to look at this is to say, well, I'm at this particular back squat, so I'm at let's say 150, and if I look down the line, that's kind of suggesting I should be at 110 or so for my clean and jerk. If your actual max is 100, then maybe that suggests a technical deficiency with your clean and jerk, or there's something about your back squat that doesn't translate. So there's a bit of information that we can look at here in terms of this, the discrepancy between the predictions this model is making and what you actually see in reality. What this is all assuming at the same time is that your deadlift and your max pull-ups and your 400 meter sprint is at the same quantile or percentile in the data that your back squat represents. So to kind of translate that, let's say 150 is the 75th percentile of all back squats in the data we have, then I've assumed that your deadlift and max pull-ups and 400 meter run time is also going to be at the 75th percentile. What's interesting here, and we'll see this more in the snatch, is that as you go up in terms of back squat, the range gets a lot wider. So that just represents that there's some really strong people out there who probably can't clean and jerk as much because of technical deficiencies, but there's also some really, really strong people out there who can clean and jerk massive weights because their technique is quite dialed in. So we can do the same exercise with the snatch. Let's take that 90 kilo snatch. Let's say I want to hit that. Well, I can move up the line and say, hey, I can maybe just sneak it in if I'm at 130 kg, but I'm not really giving myself a good chance. I'm going to increase the odds a little bit if I go to 140, but if I'm at 150, I know that I'm well within the range where that's a doable weight. Similarly, 100 is like a really nice target, even though it's not quite plotted here, but we can kind of guess. So we can look along this x-axis, scroll up and say, yeah, it's possible at 150 if you're a really good squatter and you're a really good snatcher for that strength level I'm talking about. So not overall snatching, I'm just talking about, hey, like for your given strength, how good are you at receiving the bar in that overhead position? But if you want to really give yourself a good chance of snatching 100 kilos, 225 pounds roughly, you probably need to be at 160 for your back squat at a bare minimum. I'd say maybe at 180 to give yourself a really good chance of being able to hit that weight. So if you're thinking about that as a potential target, that kind of gives you some good guidelines on your back squat. So whether or not I don't know if you'd want to dedicate all of your time just to back squatting to get it to the 180 mark. You obviously want to be snatching at the same time to develop the technical proficiency. But if you're thinking about a couple of cycles laid out in succession that you want to be able to kind of put together a 100 kilo snatch, then that gives you an idea of where your back squat needs to be in order to give yourself a good chance. And then obviously if you hit 100, you want to start going for 110, 120, and you want to lay the back squat number in front of that number a little bit more. So that kind of gives you a little bit of guidance of where you could expect to land given where your back squat strength is. It would be nice, we don't have the data on front squatting, but it'd be nice to have that. So I'm going to have a look if anyone knows some sources. I'd be really interested. Like I mentioned at the top, any questions, any comments, queries, you want to look into this a bit more deeply, leave a comment, send me a message, email, whatever suits you, and I'd happily get back in touch.